You're in your company's 401k portal. You're doing the responsible thing, scrolling through your options. Target date fund, index fund, maybe a bond fund. And then something new shows up. Crypto exposure, private assets, alternatives. And you pause. Because now it feels like you're missing something. Like, if this is here, am I supposed to be using it? Here's the question no one is asking yet. If 401k's start including alternative assets, what actually changes about the outcome? My name is Max, and I spend way too much time thinking about how retirement systems shape decisions people don't realize they're making. Here's the thing. In March 2026, the U.S. Department of Labor proposed a rule to make it easier for 401k plans to include cryptocurrencies and other alternative assets. Not required, not recommended, just easier. And that sounds like a small policy shift. But it's not. Because when the menu changes, the behavior changes, and eventually, the outcomes change. So let's walk through 3 shifts that happen if this becomes normal. And then we're going to go one level deeper into what happens when you actually try to use your money. Because that's where this gets real. Shift number 1. The menu starts shaping decisions more than strategy does. Look, most people think they're making active choices in their 401k. But data says otherwise. According to Vanguard's How America Saves report, a large percentage of participants stick with default allocations or make very few changes over time. So when new options appear, people don't suddenly become more strategic. They become more reactive. Here's what most people don't realize. The presence of an option creates a question, and the question creates pressure. Should I be using this? Even if you don't understand it, even if it doesn't fit. So now, instead of a simple decision, you have a layered one, and that leads to hesitation, or worse, random allocation. Not because you're careless, because the system just got more complex. Shift number 2. Small allocations start creating large consequences. Let's use real numbers. Say you have $150,000 in your 401k. You decide to allocate 10% to an alternative asset. That's $15,000. Now imagine that asset drops 40%. You're down $6,000. Now here's where people get this wrong. They think it's only 10%. It won't matter that much. But here's the math. If your overall portfolio was growing at around 6% annually, that $6,000 loss can offset an entire year of expected growth. Not emotionally, mathematically. And according to data from Federal Reserve surveys, many Americans already struggle to absorb even small financial shocks. So adding volatility inside a long-term account doesn't just increase upside potential. It increases timing sensitivity, which means your outcome becomes more dependent on when things happen, not just what you chose. Shift number 3. The definition of normal quietly shifts. Look, when something shows up inside a 401k, it doesn't just become available. It starts to feel approved, not officially, but psychologically. We've seen this before. As access to equities expanded through retirement accounts, participation increased significantly. Not because everyone became an expert, because it became standard. So if alternatives show up in your plan, they don't just expand options. They redefine what feels reasonable. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because nothing about the asset itself changed. Only its placement. And placement is powerful. It turns complexity into something that feels familiar, even when it's not. Now, up to this point, everything we've talked about is happening during the growth phase, while the money is sitting there, moving, changing. But here's the part almost no one is talking about. Retirement is not just about growth. It's about access. And this is where things change. Because 401k's were built around assets you can price daily and sell instantly. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Now introduce assets that don't always behave that way, and say the rules of the system don't change to match them. Let's go deeper. What happens when you try to take the money out? First, liquidity starts controlling your timing. At age 59 and a half, you can withdraw without the 10% penalty. That's the rule. But the rule assumes you can then get your money when you need it. Now, imagine you're 60. You need $50,000. But part of your balance is tied up in an asset that can't be sold immediately or only updates pricing periodically. Now, your decision isn't just, when do I want to withdraw? It becomes, when am I allowed to withdraw? That's a structural shift. Second, what you see may not be what you can use. Let's say your account shows $600,000, but part of that is tied to assets that aren't priced in real time. You take a distribution. What gets sold first? Usually, the most liquid, easiest to access portion. So over time, something subtle happens. You start draining the flexible assets and leaving the rigid ones behind. Not because you chose to, because the system defaulted that way. And your portfolio becomes harder to manage, right when you need it to be simpler. Third, your taxes start following availability instead of intention. 401k withdrawals are taxed as ordinary income. That doesn't change. But here's the shift. If certain assets aren't accessible when you need income, you withdraw from what is. Now your taxable income isn't just based on your plan. It's based on what the structure allows you to touch. And once that happens, precision disappears. You're reacting again, just at a different stage of life. Now step back for a second, because this is the part that ties everything together. The Department of Labor is making it easier to expand what goes into these plans. But nothing about this guarantees a smoother path for what comes out. And retirement is entirely about the exit. So what should you actually do with this? 3 things. First, don't confuse access with advantage. Just because something is available doesn't mean it improves your outcome. Second, model the downside before the upside. Run the numbers. If this drops 30, 40, 50%, what does that actually do to your timeline? Third, think in terms of structure, not ingredients. Your 401k isn't a collection of ideas. It's a system. And systems either make decisions easier over time or harder. So let's come back to where we started. You're in your 401k. You see something new, and it feels like you need to act. But the real shift isn't the asset. It's the pressure. The pressure to interpret, participate, to not fall behind. And once you see that, you realize something most people miss. The system didn't just give you more options. It gave you more responsibility at every stage, including the one that matters most, when you actually need the money. Thanks for watching. If you're someone who feels like you're being asked to make bigger financial decisions with less clarity than ever before, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.